Slim Dusty and Lights on the Hill. That was for Jeff, who won Clueless Bob probably about 4 hours ago. 1300 800 222. Are you involved in small business? Of the stimulus packages that the government introduced come through to you. What are the difficulties in small business? Not only through bushfire, but imagine if you got the double whack and you got the coronavirus on top of bushfires as well. 1300 800 222 is the number to call. And as we come out of the lockdowns, how do you actually reinvent? How do you re-stimulate your business? Give us a ring, 1300 800 222. Mathew Dickerson, small business consultant. Hi, Matthew.
Hey, g'day, Trevor. Good to see you in the virtual sense, although it's no different for us because we never sit in the same studio together.
That's true. Mind you, you're as clear as a bell.
Well, that's the thing, that the whole coronavirus has changed. We have looked at our technology, so we are using a different method to dial in tonight, and I agree, you sound much better than we normally have over the normal telephone call.
Well, thank you, Matt. Matthew, there's been a lot of talk by government with stimulus packages for small business. As we also heard for bushfire victims, there were stimulus packages for small business as well. But with the bushfires, we've heard that some people are still waiting on that support. What I was wondering, when you hear governments make these announcements, by the time some small businesses get the money, is it too late?
It can well be, and sometimes some of the announcements, you get the feeling that they like to roll off a big number and make it sound impressive. And the great ABC show Utopia used to have the whistle value of the number. So when a Polly rolls out a number, they make it sound big and impressive, and people whistle and go, wow, that's a big number. And sometimes it doesn't actually get to where it needs to go. Having said that, I actually think some of the stimulus packages that are being rolled out at the moment should be quite good for small businesses that need it. And if the figures or the timelines are stuck to, then I think it will be acceptable. It would have been nicer to have it quicker. It would have been nicer to have those packages ready to roll out when they first started locking things down, because people were laid off their jobs, then suddenly they were able to be re-employed again. But gee, it was a pretty tough environment to work through to try and make those things happen pretty quickly. So, you know, we've got the JobKeeper, we've got the cash flow boost for employers, we've got the instant asset write-off has been increased, we've got supporting apprentices and trainees. So there's a whole range of different packages there. And Trevor, I don't want to get into really nitty-gritty detail with callers when they come in. I mean, I don't want to start giving accounting advice. We've got accountants to do that. But happy to talk about some of those things in general, and also other things that businesses might do.
When you take a look at that, because there is the individual responsibility of the small business to be able to do that, is that the difficult part, though, trying to work out how you either reinvent yourself or whether or not you shut down and then just sort of like wait it out?
And I think that's one thing, at least the JobKeeper package has given people the option to do that, to say, we will shut down, we've got $750 a week to pay our employees, it mightn't be what they were paid before, I've still got some other expenses, so I might have to pay some rent, some electricity, but I think the wage expense is usually the major expense for any business, so it does give them that option. But most small businesses that I've been talking to and working with are trying to work out ways that they can do things a little bit differently and try and keep plugging away. And they all accept they're probably not going to make as much money unless you're selling toilet paper or hand sanitizer. You're probably not going to make as much money through this process. But I think the reality is that most small business people would still rather be turning up to work each day and doing something useful and trying to do something rather than just sit back and say, I'll sit at home for a few months and take the amount that the government's giving us. And in some industries, it's pretty tough. I mean, I'd hate to be in a pub or a cafe or a restaurant. I mean, it's pretty tough for those businesses when you've just been shut down, no crowds there, and it's really taken the heart out of those businesses. But other businesses are really trying some creative, innovative ways to keep plugging away.
Because that must be incredibly frustrating, because you hear people being praised for being innovative and for doing different things, and you hear even government saying, you know, terrific to see people doing different things and managing to be able to keep the businesses alive. But if there's just no way that you can do it, you would just be so frustrated.
Yeah, it would be. And again, there's a friend of mine who had a very successful gym, and the day that it was announced, he basically said to his 23 staff, well, sorry guys, I've got no work for you. That was before JobKeeper was introduced, obviously. I've got no work for you. He basically didn't know what he was going to do. It's really tough in some of those industries. So in some, I don't know we've got much of an option, but to take the JobKeeper, to take the subsidies that are there and do the best you possibly can to basically wade through the whole storm and then get to somewhere that's an end. And I think that's another really tough part of it. And I had someone talking to me the other day and they said they could see that they could survive if they knew an end date. And of course, no one knows an end date. No one across the world knows an end date. But if they could see that this is going to happen for a month or 2 months or 3 months, they could plan around that. It's the unknown nature that makes this something that most businesses have never seen before. And you can't plan for this. I mean, some people have said, did you have a disaster plan? Did you have an emergency plan in place? Well, I don't know that anyone had an emergency plan that was going to say, when the pandemic strikes and it hits business across the world, this is what I'm going to do, because it's unprecedented.
I'll come back to that because we've spoken about emergency plans in small business as far as bushfire is concerned, and we'll talk about the difference in just a second. If you're involved in small business and you want to join this conversation, 1300 800 222. If you're employed by someone in small business and you want to talk about, number one, for you as a staff member, but also how you see your bosses and how the people that run your business are coping, give us a ring. 1300 800 222 is our number. Hello, Reece.
G'day, Trev. Matt, many thanks for the segment. Really enjoy it. Matt, I don't think the economy was flash before the corona started anyhow. And my business has had a downturn of 51% over the period, and I believe I'm therefore eligible for the JobKeeper. I've kept my blokes on throughout this. We haven't had a great deal of work, but we're just bobbing along. Waiting for. We've got a big job to come up, but I've just kept the guys working, you know.
Can I just ask firstly, Reece, what do you do?
Build.
Oh, you build, okay.
Yeah, so I'm really grateful for the JobKeeper.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's cost me $300 to apply for it through bookkeeping fees, you know.
And there's some of those costs that, again, in small business, you get hit with costs all over the place. But you've mentioned 51%. That's obviously terrible, but at least because it is a 30% decrease that you need, and that's comparing this year to last year. You can compare 1 month or you can compare a quarter, the equivalent period, say for example the April to June quarter this year compared to last year, or just even comparing March this year to March last year. So that qualifies you for it. There's a whole range of other criteria as well, which I won't go through in detail, but you've paid someone to go through and do that, and at least then you've got some money coming in. And one of the things, I actually was doing a bit of work with a builder, and one of the things that I talked to that builder about was that builder typically built houses. And so with the uncertainty around people's employment and the uncertainty around people being able to get loans from the bank, he's actually changed his business now, and he's basically gone into handyman mode. With a lot of people at home trying to do work from home, they're actually finding things around the house that needs to be done. And so it's not as good a work as doing a cottage or building houses, but at least it gives builders some work to do, some small work to do to help some of those people that are staying home. So again, you're always looking for those little opportunities. I don't know if that's applicable in your business, but looking for some of that smaller work with people at home can be a really effective way a builder can take advantage of that.
Reece, can I just ask, what's the application process like?
Well, I got the bookkeeper to do it, and you had to change all your MYOB system to be able to put it into it to apply for it, and then she had to check it off with the accountant to make sure that she'd done it all right, and we've done it and we've applied for it. But Matt, we haven't got any stimulus package yet, and so I don't think it's going to be doled out until the 1st of May.
Correct.
And your point about changing up to getting handyman work is exactly how we're surviving at the moment. But it's on the central coast of New South Wales. It's so competitive. It's just a struggle there.
Hey, Reece, do you think that you'll get the money, not in time, but to be in a position where you'll feel more comfortable in time?
I'll be really grateful to see it. Yeah, I'll be really grateful. But time, we don't know, do we,
yeah.
Trevor? We have no idea. But I mean, I'm not sort of complaining about the bushfire money, and I gratefully wasn't in that position. But you don't know. We will get it.
That's the thing, and you were just talking about this, Matthew, is the uncertainty, and especially when you're in business and you're wanting to keep your workers on, and you can only do that for a certain period of time. So when this JobKeeper money comes through, it's going to be really important for small business.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's two things that someone like Reece should be able to achieve. One is the JobKeeper money, the $750 a week per employee, and the other one's the cash flow boost. So when someone like Reece lodges his GST, the pay-as-you-go tax that's being paid on behalf of employees should be given back to him as a credit on that lodgement of the BAS. So he may not have to pay anything, or he may even get a refund back. So they're good, and again, they should come in from the beginning of May for JobKeeper and after the 28th of April for the cash flow boost. So they're two things that we should see pretty quickly, and hopefully the government does deliver. We've heard they will. Hopefully they will, because cash flow becomes pretty tight when suddenly your work dries up and you're still trying to pay your employees every week.
It's one of the things about JobKeeper that when we come through this and out the other side, whatever, and that will change, that'll be different for different businesses about when they'll be able to open, that you keep your staff close to you, though, so that when you do start again, that you've got everything ready to go.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the really clever things about JobKeeper, Trevor. It means that even if you've closed down, you can actually keep your employees on, and you can actually have your employees do things that are not ridiculously outside their normal work. But if you need to go in and do a stock take, or maybe you've been meaning to change a display around, you can still get your staff coming in doing something of use. And I think people feel better if they're doing something useful, and you've still got them engaged in the business in some way, even though you might not be flat out. And then, exactly right, you open up and then suddenly you've got all your employees there ready to go again. So that's a clever part of it, because if you had to lay off all your staff and then in 3 months' time start up again, well, gee, that's going to be tough for a business, almost like it's starting out from scratch again.
Does that involve bookkeeping-wise? Does that mean you have to do a whole stack more bookkeeping again?
I don't think...
Re-employ?
No, I think you actually keep them employed. The idea is...
I'm not saying with JobKeeper, but if you actually did have to let them go.
If you had to stand down your employees, you're basically terminating your employees, you're paying out all their annual leave, you're paying out everything that they're owed, and then they're no longer an employee. And even if those same employees come back again in 3 months' time, if you didn't have JobKeeper, then yeah, they're just like a new employee. You'd fill out your new declarations, your tax declarations, you'd start again.
So that is it was a very clever system for the government to put in place.
Yeah, I think it does work well. I said I would have loved to have seen when they announced the lockdown and said, sorry, you're going to have to close pubs, you're going to have to close a whole range of businesses. I would have loved to have seen that JobKeeper on that day, because, you know, I saw people in tears. They've just laid off all their staff because they can't see how they can keep them employed. And 2 weeks later, they can put them back on again. And the emotional toll on people, I think, was pretty tough.
Sue, hello.
Hi.
Yes, Sue.
I've got a couple of restaurants in the middle of Queensland, outback Queensland. We had to shut one down literally straight away. The moment it happened, it was only a small restaurant. We're managing to keep the other going, but as you've been saying, cash flow is a nightmare at the moment. We're in the restaurant trade. It really started to hit us just before any announcements to move to, I think what was it, 1.5 metres, and then you had 4 square metres, and then nothing. And people stopped coming in probably 10 days before it all started to shut down. So all those bills that you've been planning to pay in that 10 days was just, they're gone. You know, all I do every day is put people off, but at the same time have to try and keep suppliers happy so that I can continue to run. We've had to totally reinvent ourselves. We are no longer a restaurant. We are a factory that produces takeaway food and delivery food. My waiters are now delivery drivers or telephone operators. We've set up 4 telephones so that people can call in with their orders. It's been crazy trying to operate. But, you know, when we talk about these stimulus packages, it's the wait. And from what I understand with the JobKeeper, yes, the money will start coming in May. But, you know, my husband and I have had to dip into our pockets ourselves to pay. We've got 15 employees that are entitled to JobKeeper, and we've had to dip into our own pockets to pay them through this period because there's not enough money coming in through revenue for it. But we won't really catch up on that until the end.
Yeah.
So,
because
Have you got a strategy for coming out?
Yes. When I say coming out, it's not going to turn. We won't open up as quickly as we shut down. It takes a lot more because some of the staff, 3 staff had to be stood down, or a little bit more than 3. So when you're in the outback, getting staff's not easy. We're in the middle of mining towns out here, and people work in the mines. They don't work in hospitality, which goes to the skilled migrants that come into town. We've sponsored over the years many, many skilled migrants to become Australian citizens, and we would not survive without them. You can't get a chef out here. And we've got one at the moment, and we're still paying him. In fact, if we lost him, if we couldn't afford to pay him, I might as well shut the doors.
So let me go back to Matthew. Matthew, you just wanted to comment?
Yeah, sorry, Sue. So that's what you're doing is fantastic, but as you say, that's $11,000 or $12,000 a week just in wages you've got to stump up for before finally the government comes back and pays you back that money. But I'm interested to hear what the reaction from the staff was like when you said, for example, your waiters, you're now going to be delivery drivers. How has the reaction been from your staff when effectively they're still able to work in the business, but their role has changed somewhat in that scenario? How did they react to that?
They've been awesome. Every single one of them has been really good and stepped up to the mark. It has been different for them. We've got a number of youngsters, and I think the anxiety and learning new roles, the anxiety about the whole coronavirus is one thing. A lot of these kids are at home on their own, or maybe with mum and dad. Their entire social work is literally coming to work, but it's also social life. Sorry, not social work. But the other side of it is you can see it through them. Some of them just went into panic mode, too scared to touch anything, too scared to be near a customer. That side of it, the actual mental health issue, is probably the biggest issue, trying to manage these people rather than them changing their jobs. They've really taken on the change of jobs really well. Some of them do it better than others. It's training. But no, they've done a very good job.
So thank you. Matthew, actually, we're just talking about the business side. There is the health side of how businesses have had to change because of literally the health aspects of having to sanitise, to clean things differently afterwards, and for things to change in that regard. Well,
there's not just the physical health, Trevor. There is, exactly as Sue alluded to there, there's the mental health as well. And when you're under that constant pressure all day, and I've seen it with some employees in some businesses, when they've been under that pressure all day, they get to the end of a work week and they actually feel fairly stressed because they've been so conscious of making sure that they are washing their hands, and they're making sure they're using hand sanitizer, and they're staying away from people. And that is something a bit different for people, and you've got to think about it consciously the whole week. And you get to the end of the week sometimes and you go, it's good just to be able to relax and sit at home by myself for a weekend. So I think people like doing useful work, and as Sue said there, most employees that I've talked to that have had to change roles a little bit have really embraced it, and they've said, I'm just happy to have a job. If I'm doing something similar, then that's okay for the time being, and it'll get back to normal one day. But yeah, there is that mental health that employers have got to be careful of with their employees.
Is that significant as well during periods of time like this, the relationships that small business owners have with their staff?
Yeah, one of the things that I certainly really stress to employers is communication, being open and communicative with your staff, and let them know how things are going. And in Sue's case, I mean, if I was Sue, I'd be saying to my staff, I'm having to fork out $10,000 or $12,000 a week, whatever it is, out of my savings to pay you all, and just so that they know what you're doing and know what you're going through. But I think people like to know and understand what's happening, not to scare them or not to say, wow, I'm a martyr for doing this for you, but I think people feel more confidence when they know what's going on. If they're kept in the dark about things and there's not an open sort of lines of communications there, then what tends to happen is people invent stories, create stories, they fill the gaps in with worse stories than can possibly be. And so just being open and communicating is really important.
If you'd like to join us, 1300 800 222. Mathew Dickerson, small business consultant, is with us. We're taking a look at the difficulty small businesses are going through at the moment. And it's good for all of us to get an understanding of what small businesses are going through at the moment. So if you're a staff member or if you run a small business and you want to ask some questions or just comment on how you're managing to get through at the moment, 1300 800 222.
What better way to spend days at home than digging in the dirt? The May issue of ABC Gardening Australia magazine has heaps of ideas to keep gardeners happy during lockdown. In the patch, grow peas and English spinach and pick up tips for nurturing veggie seedlings. Read up on single roses and native grasses, as well as garden sculpture, greywater and which common garden plants can bounce back after bushfire. Gardening Australia magazine available from newsagents and abcmagazines.com.au.
1300 800 222, Mathew Dickerson, our guest. I've got a couple of texts here that say, firstly, just trying to work out the JobKeeper at the moment. I'm a sole trader and noticed they want to know if I am 30% lower than March 2019. But unfortunately, I had time out in March 2019 because I was sick, so I didn't earn much. So probably earned the same this year. Will they take that into consideration or will I miss out?
They won't take that into consideration, is my understanding, but you can also do it on a later period. So, for example, you can compare like for like. So if March 2019 happened to be a bad month for whatever reason, and that example there, someone was sick, then March 2020 may not be 30% down, but April 2020 may be 30% down, or the April quarter might be 30% down. So it really is trying, the government's been quite reasonable about it and saying you need to just be able to demonstrate that you have had a 30% drop. We don't want people rorting the system, don't want everyone just getting the money if they've had an increase for whatever reason, their industry. So I think in that example, and again, I'm always reluctant to give accounting advice on the radio, Trevor, but I would talk to my accountant there and I'd look at the April month or the April quarter.
So they will take into consideration other months outside that month?
Correct. I don't think they'll take into consideration the fact that they were sick last year, but other months are able to be looked at.
Yep. My parents own a motel. They've pretty much gone broke with the border that's been locked down at the moment. They've been rejected for financial assistance trying to negotiate with the landowner over rent, which is $16,000 a week.
Whew.
God, right.
Yeah. Now, and that, I mean, there was some discussion around renters, for example, and just someone renting a house or someone renting a business. And obviously there was the whole process about not being evicted. And then the landlords, for a lot of landlords, that might be their retirement. They might have invested in a house or in a motel, and that might be their superannuation. So it's a tough one, that one. You don't want to see a business be kicked out because you want them to keep making money for you if you're the landlord, but at the same time, you're probably relying on that money coming in.
And this is an issue because we talked about people being stuck with a double whammy. Text saying we're a small business and aren't eligible for JobKeeper, etc., because our business had already had a downturn due to the drought.
Well, and that's another part of it as well. And unfortunately, that's not being taken into account. And certainly in regional areas, the drought had a major impact on certain businesses over the last year or even 2 years. So you might have had a terrible month last year. And again, that'd be the sort of one I'd take up with my accountant and see if there's any leeway there. But when you read the JobKeeper rules, they're pretty clear. They're comparing March this year to March last year, or the April quarter to the April quarter last year. So there was nothing in there to say that there was some sort of way to look at different circumstances last year, because some people would have had a terrible March last year because of the drought.
Is there a way of negotiating that or speaking to someone, in inverted commas, to explain that?
I would try, but the rules as I read it are pretty clear, and so it doesn't look like there's a lot of room for leeway. But again, that'd be the sort of thing that I'd go to my accountant and say, can you have a talk to the ATO and explain, look at March 2018 or March 2017, here was a normal March, and look at March 2020, compare that rather than last year. Again, the rules don't say that, but I think that it'd be worth the conversation, and if you get nowhere, you get nowhere. It's not going to hurt to have the conversation.
Michael, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I'm a small business owner in regional Queensland in engineering services, and we're very lucky we haven't been directly affected, but of course the family members of our employees have been. But one thing I've noticed, and I agree, this job seeker scheme pretty clever, and I think for a government to implement this in 6 or so weeks.
We've just lost you. Sorry, just say that again, Michael. We lost you for a second.
I just wanted to agree that the job seeker package is pretty clever, and I think it is a pretty good thing for the government to implement even in 6 weeks. But one thing I've found in this downturn, or big sharp downturn which we've got compared to others, is we went into cash preservation mode. But what we've found is that actually people have been paying us more on time, suppliers and that, and I think the government's work with lifting up credit with the work with the banks has really helped in businesses that are operating.
We lost you. Just Matthew, I mean, because that's a lot about cash flow as well.
It is a lot about cash flow, and I think the government has put a fair bit of pressure on the banks to say, don't be your normal self, banks. How about you be a bit kinder than you normally are? And I think that's critical, because the last thing we want is to have the banks come in and sell up someone's house, or basically force some businesses to close down that really are good businesses, but they just need some support to get through the next maybe 3 to 6 months.
Is one of because we would talk about the difference between what's happened as far as bushfires are concerned and what's happening now. In that bushfires, that there is an out point because it's a disaster. So it happens, it comes in, and then you work out, this is what I do. But with what we're going through now, we don't know, and we're not cognizant of what's going to happen in the future. Is that one of the big cash flow issues, is that you don't know how to budget, if you want, for want of a better word, the amount of money that you have for this amount of time?
I've seen some people who have talked about make sure you've got plans in for when you can open up again, and plan your next 13 weeks and put your budget together. But gee, all of that's pretty hard when you don't know where the end is. And as you say, with something like a bushfire, you know that it might burn for a certain amount of time, or you might be able to plan for it because you're in a bushfire area. But and it's not something where you can say, well, it's okay, I'm being affected in New South Wales, so I can sell my services to Queensland. It's a worldwide thing. It's not just an area, it's not just a state, not just a country, it's across the world. So it's really difficult, and I just don't think businesses and people have seen this. I mean, we go back to the Great Depression, and there's not many people alive at the moment that have lived through the Great Depression and certainly run businesses through the Great Depression. I think the critical thing, though, Trevor, is it's a bit like the grand final. You hear a coach talking about a grand final, and he says to his players, this is what you've done in the past, all the basics are there, and don't do anything different now that you're in the grand final. And I think for businesses at the moment, if you're still trading, if you're still able to do things, getting all the basics right is absolutely critical. So returning that phone call, making sure you're following up on that quote when you sent that quote through to a customer last week, all those little basic things that are really important for good business, making sure you do all those basics right. And that includes your planning, that includes your budgeting, your cash flow, all those basics. Now is the time that those basics get amplified. And I think the businesses that will come through this and still be okay at the other end are the businesses that didn't necessarily do something fancy, they just did the basics right.
Kevin joins us. Hello, Kevin.
Good morning.
Yes, Kev.
Yes, I'm a sole trader in Ballarat here as a driving instructor, and I was listening to Matt there before saying how some people have only lost a certain percentage. I've lost 100% in 3 weeks. Had a lot of money booked up. Just bought a brand new car. But the good thing about all this is that it's been really good how the finance companies have been great in supporting businesses, where a common courtesy call of just saying how you're going, and they've been really fantastic. They've backed me in the last couple of weeks, and I've been able to diversify and become a truck driver.
And so I'm interested, Kevin, the driving instruction, has that stopped because of the distance between you and a student sitting in the driving seat being less than 1.5 metres? Or has it just been where the students have said, we don't want to keep going on because we're sitting too close to someone else?
No, the first, what you said there, just being too close.
Yep.
And look, I'm not the only one in that boat. There's a lot of us in Ballarat who are in the same boat, and most of us are all sole traders. But obviously we've been taking phone calls about asking when we're going to start up, and once again, how do you put a time frame on it?
Yeah, that's the problem. And again, and I don't want to ask about your individual circumstances. You've talked about being a sole trader, but because you've lost so much of your business, you should be eligible for the JobKeeper. So again, it's only $750 a week. That's not going to cover all your costs with your car and your lease payments and your general running of the business. But at least it's some money coming in, and then your truck driving to top that up.
Yes. Like I am fortunate that I am very diversified in lots of fields, but there's a lot of people out there who ain't. Who are doing a lot harder than me, so I can just be grateful that I have got a job there,
Yeah.
Good on you, Kevin. Thank you. Hey, Matthew, just with that, if you, like Kevin, you have a business and you're diversified, so he's off truck driving and he's able to get the JobKeeper as well. Is he allowed to do both?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's one of those things that you can only get JobKeeper payment from one employer, so you can't go and double dip with the JobKeeper payment if you had two jobs, for example. But you seem to be able to go and earn some other income to try and top it up, because there is an admission by the government that $750 isn't the normal wage. It's obviously a percentage of the average or the median wage. So if you can go and top it up, I think the government will be encouraging you to do that.
But within that, then if you earn a certain amount, do you then lose part of that $750?
From my reading of it, no, it doesn't seem to be that way. It seems to be that employer can pay you the $750 and you can keep going along and earning that, and then go and earn some extra money. Good luck to you. And I think the government would encourage that, because they want money to keep turning over in the economy. I mean, that's the big problem with this. You get the flow-on effect, and I think that's where we'll still see the impacts of COVID-19 in a year or maybe even longer, because the knock-on effect of all the things that are happening now. A function centre might stop ordering from a supplier to supply food to them, and then their delivery trucks aren't being used as much. And then in 6 months' time, when those delivery trucks might need a new set of tyres normally, suddenly they don't. So it's that knock-on effect that's going to really hurt the economy for a long period of time.
The relationship that you have with your suppliers, because this obviously goes down a chain. So if I own a restaurant, I need to be able to pay my staff, I need to be able to keep the business going. However, if I close down, then the people that are my suppliers, they then need to get the money to keep them going. And then the people who provide for the supplies, then it goes back down to the people who grow the food, and then it goes down the line. If you've got a good relationship, or everyone has a good relationship down that line, in that they know, okay, the money will come through, but it could take a little while, is that significant?
It is, and I think it's one of those things where a bit of goodwill in a normal trading, and I'm a big fan of having those good relationships with your suppliers, paying your suppliers on time, just making sure that you're, again, open and communicating with your suppliers. When something like this does happen, suddenly you can say, well, I've had a perfect payment record for the last 5 years I've been dealing with you. I'm going to be behind this month. Most suppliers say, that's okay, I know what your track record's been like. If you're someone that's always been late and you're always arguing with them and you're sending back every product that seems to have a minor blemish on it, and then you ask for a favour in a situation like this, you're much less likely to get it. So it's a good idea in good times to keep those good relationships going.
Another text is saying, I could hire a person straight away on my farm, except I'm still recovering from the dairy crisis from 4 years ago.
Wow.
I had the whole household allowance that is soon to expire. It does take a long time to get back on your feet and recover from a bad credit rating.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we've had some things happen across this country, and that's another example that goes back a few more years, that there are some industries and businesses that I wouldn't like to be in, because it just feels like you're just getting up after the last knockdown and you get knocked down again. And, it's a pretty tough environment to be in. And that's, again, where that mental health aspect becomes really significant.
With the whole idea of actually still just maintaining business, keeping afloat and going through that, what do you think will some of be the exit strategies, Matthew? What do people with business need to be thinking about coming out the other side?
Yeah, look, I think, again, it's getting those basics right, but also the term I've been using a lot with businesses is swim upstream. don't do what seems like the norm for everyone else. So I've seen some businesses that say, right, we better cut back our advertising, reduce the number of hours that we trade, cut back our staff wherever possible. And I've been saying, how about you do the opposite of that? How about you increase your advertising, look for other products that you might be able to sell? Are there things that people need at the moment that they may not necessarily need all the time? So if you owned a sporting goods store, for example, you're not going to sell footy boots now because no one's going to be playing sport, but you might be able to sell some gym equipment for people to set up home gyms. So looking for other things that you can do. Coming out the other end then, you might actually find that your business looks a little bit different. It might return to how it was, but you might find that now you've become a specialist in providing gym equipment and looking at people's homes and how they can set up that gym equipment. So that's just one little example, but it's that sort of thing. You're trying to do things the opposite. So I've seen businesses where they've increased their trading hours to spread out how many people are in their store at any one time. Do more advertising, as I said, or even having your staff work some extra hours across that spreading out so that no longer are they 9 to 5, they might be working 8 to 4, and so they're just changing the way they do things. But you're looking for opportunities, and the best place to get those opportunities is from your employees. The best ideas will be in the heads of your employees. Ask them, and you'll be amazed what they'll come up with.
Lovely text saying, Trevor, I have one of the rare businesses that is actually booming at the moment because I provide cleaning supplies and services. But the big challenge is helping employees cope. For example, I have a 27-year-old who's never lived or experienced a recession, never worried about money or the future, and I feel like I'm more of a social worker than a business owner at times.
I think that happens, Trevor. I think you sometimes end up being, if you've got younger employees, you feel like you're a mum or a dad to people sometimes, a social worker, someone breaks up with their girlfriend or boyfriend and suddenly you're almost counselling them around that. So small business seems to have a pretty good relationship with their employees, and you end up doing a lot more than just being an employer.
Anthony, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Look, I'm a landlord. I own a small property with that's leased out to a small car yard, right?
Yeah.
The property gives me my pension, right? My query is the tenants basically stopped paying rent and using this situation as an excuse to renege on it. Right. Now, the reason I'm so blunt with it is because it refuses to provide proof of, capability.
Matthew, in that regard, Anthony, can they? Are they able to operate?
Yes, they're not closed down at all. And also, the other part of it is they also run a real estate agency from the same property.
Oh, thank you. This is where there are going to be all sorts of anomalies, Matthew.
Well, and actually I think landlords have been the ones that have really missed out in the whole process. And, landlords get painted as the rich landlord owning all this property, but there are a lot of people, exactly like Anthony, that have made investments. Instead of investing in share market or in cash in the bank, they've invested in real estate, and it's a reasonable thing to do. And when they've talked about no evictions for 6 months, when they've talked about protecting the people in, whether it be residential or business properties, the landlord, and exactly as Anthony says, the landlord feels like, well, hold on, where is my protection? Where is my income stream? Because I've worked hard to get to that point to own some property. That's my pension, and now I'm being diddled out of that to a certain extent. So I hope the government looks at this. I think it's weighted way too heavily in favour of renters at the moment. I hope this is one of those areas that the government looks at and says, let's address this. The New South Wales government, for example, talked about exemption for land tax, but that's a drop in the ocean for the overall income that a landlord might normally have.
Good to talk to you, Matthew, as always.
Thanks, Trevor.
Mathew Dickerson, small business consultant. Thank you to everybody.